At dawn in Pasadena, a black screen waited in a room full of tired people. Nobody knew yet what Mars would look like from the ground. Then a pale strip appeared. Not a landscape, not a horizon, just the first thin evidence that another world had begun sending itself home. If Mars had lived for centuries as a red point, why did the first real view feel less like victory than loneliness? Viking 1 touched down on July 20th, 1976, at 11,053,006 UT in Christ Planitia, a broad plain on Mars. At JPL, controllers received word of the safe landing at 5:12 a.m. Pacific Time. The signal had crossed the dark between worlds. Before that morning, Mars was familiar only from far away, a red lamp, a telescope disk, a place people filled with canals, cities, and warnings. Maps had already softened some dreams. Orbiters showed craters, volcanoes, channels, scars, but maps keep distance. They do not give you dust. Pause. The question that morning was not just whether Vikings survived. It was whether Mars would become a place you could imagine standing in. NASA describes Viking 1 as the first truly successful landing on Mars, while noting Mars 3 touched down earlier but died within seconds. This matters because the photograph was not the first from another planet. Venus had already sent one through Soviet Venera 9. The precise claim is quieter and stronger. Viking 1 returned the first photograph ever taken from the surface of Mars. There is a difference between seeing a world from above and seeing it at ankle height. One feels scientific, the other feels personal. NASA says the first image began appearing about 40 minutes after touchdown confirmation, forming line by line from left to right. Imagine waiting for a planet to arrive in pieces, not all at once. A sliver, a pause, another sliver, dust assembling itself. Thomas Much, leader of the imaging team, called that first narrow strip a sliver of electronic magic on a black screen. Magic is not usually so practical. This image had a job. It needed to show whether the machine landed safely. The first frame showed rocks, sand, and one spacecraft footpad. It was proof before it was scenery. That is the strange part. Humanity reached another world, and the first thing it showed us was a foot planted in dirt. No towers, no canals, no watching figures on a ridge. Just pebbles, grit, and a machine touching something untouched by weather we know. Viking 1 had launched on August 20th, 1975, and reached Martian orbit on June 19th the next year. Those dates belong to mission history. But the emotional history begins with that ugly, useful picture crawling across a screen. The landing site, Christi Planitia, means Golden Plain. NASA lists Viking Lander 1 at about 22.4083 degrees north, 47.94 degrees west. Golden Plain is a warm name for a place that looks emptied out, a shallow world of dust, stone, and distance. Viking was not only a lander. The project paired orbiters and landers, built to study Mars from above and from the surface. But from above, Mars can still hide behind beauty. Canyons become patterns, craters become circles, distance makes even damage look designed. The surface image refused that distance. It lowered the eye. It made Mars less mythical and somehow more unsettling. NASA's first image pages describe a grainy view with rocks and sand, ending with the spacecraft footpad at the far right. Think about that framing. Not a majestic postcard. Not the planet posing. A piece of equipment checking the ground beneath itself. It is almost awkward, like opening a door to history and finding the room empty, except for one chair dragged slightly out of place. Whisper. Mars did not greet us. It did not perform. It simply sat there, under a thin sky, letting a machine stare at its feet. The Smithsonian identifies the Viking 1 frame as the first image taken from the surface of Mars. Museums can make such objects feel finished. But on that morning, the image was raw. It was still arriving. Controllers had to wait for data to cross interplanetary space, then become lines, then become something the human eye could trust. Trust matters here. For years, Mars had punished machines. Flybys failed. Landers missed. Signals vanished where certainty should have been. Mars 3 claimed a technical first landing in 1971, but contact ended almost immediately, leaving no enduring surface view. So Viking survival was not routine. It was a soft touchdown after a long history of instruments going quiet. NASA science calls Viking 1 the first truly successful Mars landing because it kept working after it touched the planet. That word, working, sounds small. On Mars, it meant the machine could breathe electricity, open its eye, and report back from the silence. And what did that open eye find? Not grandeur, ground. The oldest and strangest subject there is, when no one has stood on it. Mach later wrote that rocks and sand were visible, and finally the footpad stamped the accomplishment with reality. Reality can be colder than fantasy. Fantasy gives us monsters or civilizations. Reality gives us dust on hardware. That dust changed the story. Mars stopped being only overhead. It became under something, a world with weight. NASA's image credit for the anniversary version is NASA JPL, a small line attached to a very large threshold. A threshold is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a grainy black and white view that almost looks like a mistake. Breath, but stare long enough, and the mistake becomes a doorway. The footpad is not in Mars. It is on Mars. That tiny preposition matters. On. Not near, not above, not imagined. On a planet people had watched from dark fields for generations. The Viking project gave scientists orbiters for global study and landers for experiments on the ground, including cameras looking outward from the surface. Still, the first picture was not about experiments. Not yet. It was about the oldest fear in exploration. Did we arrive intact? NASA says the first image served an immediate engineering purpose, showing the nearby surface and one lander footpad after touchdown. So the loneliest photograph in space history began as a safety check. A machine looked down to see if the ground had accepted it. There is something intimate about that. The first act after arrival was not looking out, but looking down. Viking's first image formed from left to right, each line making the alien surface less abstract and more stubbornly physical. A rock is not mysterious until it is the first rock seen from where it lies on another world. Then it becomes a witness. It was there before the signal. Before the room in Pasadena held its breath, the image did not prove life. Viking's biology experiments became their own long argument. But this first frame proved place. Place is powerful. A place can be empty and still change you. Maybe especially then, because emptiness has texture, powder at the edge of a pad, pebbles scattered without pattern, a horizon that does not care we arrive. NASA's anniversary material frames the image as the beginning of our first ground-level view of the red planet. If this quiet kind of space history keeps you company at night, consider liking and subscribing. No noise, just more rooms like this one. The first Mars surface photograph did not ask us to cheer. It asked us to adjust the scale of our imagination. Viking 1's mission lasted far beyond landing day, but the first image remains the emotional hinge because it made contact visible. Contact is usually imagined as a handshake. Here, it was stranger. Metal against soil, with nobody nearby to hear it settle. The photograph showed one human-made object sharing a frame with Martian dirt, a symbolic artifact beside an alien surface. That is why the picture feels haunted, not by ghosts, by absence, by the proof that arrival does not make a place less alone. In science fiction, Mars often waits for us with secrets. In the first real photograph, Mars waited with rocks. Those rocks and sand were enough. NASA's account emphasizes that their visibility gave the achievement the sign of reality. Pause. Maybe that is the reversal. The image became historic because it was not grand. It was historic because it was plain. A plain thing can end an old dream gently. Mars was no longer only a symbol. It had inconvenient details. By avoiding the larger claim, the history becomes clearer. Venus had a surface image first, but Mars got its first successful view here. Accuracy does not shrink the wonder. It sharpens it. This was Mars becoming visible from its own ground. The red point became a landscape. The landscape became a floor. The floor held a footpad, and the footpad told us the door was open. So when you see that grainy frame, do not look for spectacle. Look for the small metal curve resting where no human hand could reach. That was the first surface view of Mars. Rocks, dust, a footpad, and beyond it, a silence large enough to become a place.